Welcome to 21st Sports Recap and Reaction for the Seattle Seahawks at the Carolina Panthers and their NFC Divisional Round Playoff matchup played January 17th, 2016. As these two teams faced off for the second time this year, this season, going back to last October when the Panthers beat the Seahawks 27-23. But we're going to go over every possession of this game and give our breakdown analysis. We're also going to go over the stats as well. But starting off on the very first possession of this game, the Panthers started off with it on their own 25-yard line. And on the first play from scrimmage, John Stewart, the Green Lantern, took it 59 yards all the way to the Seattle 16-yard line for the first down. And that set up the Panthers in the red zone on just the second play from scrimmage in this game. Now on this very next play, Cameron Artis-Payne would fumble the ball as Michael Bennett forced the fumble, but it was recovered by Mike Tolbert. So the fullback jumps on it, and now it was 2nd and 2 from the 8-yard line. Cam Newton picked up 4 yards, and that made it a 1st and goal at the 4. And John Stewart, the Green Lantern, scores a 4-yard touchdown run. Graham Gano hits the extra point, and the Panthers were on the board first as they led 7-0 with 12.5 still left in the first quarter. So the Panthers waste little time scoring, just 2.5 minutes in. And now the Seahawks would get the ball for the first time in this game on offense. They would start out at their own 14-yard line. And then on 2nd and 13 from the 11, Luke Kuechly intercepts Russell Wilson, and he returns it for the pick six, 14 yards into the end zone. Graham Gano adds the extra point, and it was 14-0 Carolina with just less than a minute after the first touchdown and less than 3.5 minutes into this game. So already the Panthers scored on offense and on defense with 11.5 minutes still left to play in the first. And it looked like this game was already over, but there's still plenty of game left to play. And on the next possession, the Seattle would take back over on offense. They would end up punting the ball after 5 plays, although they did reach Carolina territory as they got to the 47-yard line. But Russell Wilson was sacked by Kawan Short, and then 2 plays later, they would punt the ball. So now Carolina would take over on offense for the second time, already having scored once on offense, once on defense. They had the ball on their own 14-yard line after the punt. They were faced with a 2nd and 8 from the 16. Cam Newton then hit the tight end Greg Olsen for a 10-yard reception, and it was a first down at the Carolina 26. Then on 3rd and 1 from the 35, John Stewart, the Green Lantern, picked up a yard in the first down at the 36. Then on 3rd and 5 from the 41, Cam Newton hit Jericho Cotchery for a 7-yard reception, a first down at the Carolina 48. Then after a penalty for a false start pushed him back to the 43, it was 2nd and 15. Cam Newton then went to Greg Olsen. He picked up 27 yards and a first down in Seattle territory at the 30. Then on 3rd and 1 from the 21, Cam Newton found Dixon for a 16-yard reception, and that would bring an end to the first quarter as it was a first down, 1st and goal on the 5 as the Panthers would start the second quarter in the red zone. John Stewart picked up 4 yards on 1st and goal, and on 2nd and goal from the 1, John Stewart plunges forward for the touchdown, his 2nd rushing touchdown of the game. Graham Gano adds the extra point, and it was now 21-0, less than a minute into the second quarter, with the Panthers up by 3 touchdowns. So now the Seahawks would take over after the touchback on the kickoff on their own 20, and on the first play from scrimmage of this possession, Russell Wilson was intercepted by Finnegan, and so now the Panthers would take over in field goal range with the ball on the Seattle 29. They weren't able to get a first down, and Graham Gano came out on 4th to attempt a 48-yard field goal. It was up, it was good, and it was now 24-0. Carolina up by more than 3 scores. Well, 3 if you get the 2-point conversion on all 3. And there was still just a little less than 13 minutes left before halftime. So now the Seahawks would take over, but the defense would sack Russell Wilson. Boston gets credit for the sack on 2nd and 10. And so now the Seahawks would go 3 and out on this possession and punt the ball back to Carolina. The Panthers would take over on their own 46 up at midfield. And on 2nd and 10 from the 46, Cam Newton finds Philly Brown for a 17-yard reception in Seattle territory, a first down at the 37. Then on 3rd and 1 from the 28, Cam Newton picks up a pair of yards, and now it's a first down at the Seattle 26. Ted Ginn then on an end around picks up 11, and it's a first down at the 15 in the red zone for Carolina. Then on 3rd and 14 from the 19, Cam Newton hits the tight end Greg Olsen for the touchdown. It's a 19-yarder, and Graham Gano adds the extra point, and now it's 31-0 Carolina over Seattle with 6.5 minutes still left in the second quarter. So now the Seattle Seahawks would take over on their own 20 after the touchback on the kickoff, and they drove up to midfield. And they had a 20-yard reception by Doug Baldwin on a 1st and 10 from the 30 after having picked up a first down on the play prior. That brought it up to midfield. Then they got into Carolina territory. They converted on a 3rd and 1 from the 26 when Wilson hit Baldwin for a 3-yard pass to make it a first down at the 23. But then a penalty pushed them back to the 33. And they were faced with a 3rd and 20 from the 33. Russell Wilson then went to Tyler Lockett. He picked up 15 yards. But that was not enough for the first down, so that made it 4th and 5 on the 18 in the red zone, and down by 31 points with about 2.5 minutes left before halftime. They elected to go for it on 4th and 5 instead of going for the field goal. And on 4th and 5, Russell Wilson hits Doug Baldwin, but Roman Harper and McClain are there to stop Baldwin 1 yard shy of the first down. So it's a turnover on downs for the Seahawks as the Panthers would take over now on their own 14-yard line. They brought the game to the 2-minute warning, but they would go 3 and out on this possession as they just ran the ball on all 3 plays. And so they would punt on 4th down, giving the ball back to the Seahawks with about a minute left in the first half. And the Seahawks took over on their own 33, and they would end up bringing the ball into field goal range. But with time running out, they would set up for a 55-yard field goal on a first down from the 37, but it was no good. So the field goal is no good, and at halftime it remained 31-0. Carolina shutting out the Seahawks in the first half of this game, and it looked like the Panthers were well on their way to their 4th NFC Championship game. But not if the Seahawks had something to say about it, as they would come out strong in their first possession of the second half. Tyler Lockett would run the opening kickoff of the second half back 50 yards, and a penalty for unnecessary roughness would tack on another 15, and so the Seahawks would start off with the ball on the Carolina 35. They picked up a first down, and then on 2nd and 1 from the 13, Russell Wilson hit Jermaine Kearse for the touchdown. Stephen Hauschka added the extra point, and the Seahawks were finally on the board just a little over a minute and a half into the second half. So it's 31-7 at this point. The Seahawks would then hold the Panthers to a punt on their next possession after 6 plays, and now Seattle would take over on their own 37 after the punt. And on 3rd and 10 from the 37, Russell Wilson scrambled 14 yards for the first down in Carolina territory at the 49, right there at midfield. Wilson then went to Kearse. He picked up 16 on the reception, but then Edwards sacks Wilson for a 9-yard loss to make it 2nd and 19. Wilson then runs for 9 to make it 3rd and 10 at the Carolina 33. And then Russell Wilson hits Tyler Lockett for a 33-yard touchdown. Hauschka adds the extra point, and it was now 31-14 as the Seattle Seahawks had scored 2 touchdowns in the first half of the third quarter, because we're at midway point in the quarter. So now the Panthers would get the ball. They ran off about 3.5 minutes off the clock, but but after 7 plays, they would end up punting it back to the Seahawks. So now the Seahawks would take over on their own 15, and they would end up getting into Carolina territory. Then on 2nd and 10 from the Carolina 43, Josh Norman sacks Russell Wilson for a 14-yard loss. That made it 3rd and 24. They would not convert on the first down, and so the punting unit would come out on 4th and 13 from the 46 and punt the ball back to the Panthers. The Panthers would then run off 6 minutes of clock as they brought the third quarter to a close, and then with about 9.5 left in the fourth, they would end up punting from their own 38 to Seattle. So now Seattle would take over with about 9.5 minutes left in this game on their own 27, down 31-14, and they started moving the ball on 2nd and 10 from the 27. They actually had a pass to Lockett, a 27-yard reception. Initially, it was ruled incomplete, but the play was reversed. And so it was a first down in Carolina territory at the 46. Wilson went back to Kearse. He picked up 15 yards and a first down at the 31. Then Wilson to Wilson, 1L to 2Ls, 10 yards, and a first down at the 21. Then on 2nd and 4 from the 15, Marshawn Lynch beast mode runs it 8 yards for the first down at the Carolina 7, as it was now 1st and goal. Then on 3rd and goal from the 3, Russell Wilson to Jermaine Kearse as he makes an incredible catch and another touchdown for Kearse, his 2nd of the game. And now with the extra point by Hauschka, it was a 10-point game with the score Carolina 31, Seattle 21. And this was with 6 minutes still left to play in the fourth. So now Carolina would get the ball on their own 31, and they would bring it up to midfield, but their drive would stall at the 50, and they would end up punting after 5 plays on the possession, but they ran off more than 3 minutes off the clock. So now Seattle would take over with less than 3 minutes left to play, the ball on their own 22. Russell Wilson went to Baldwin. He picked up 13 yards in the first down at the 35. Then on 2nd and 2 from the 43, Wilson goes to Wilson, 1L to 2Ls, and it's a 14-yard reception and a first down in Carolina territory at the 43. Then on 3rd and 4, a penalty for a false start would make it 3rd and 9 at the 42. And then Wilson goes to Baldwin. He picks up 13 yards and a first down at the 29. Then Wilson goes back to Baldwin. He picks up 16, and it's a first down in the red zone at the Carolina 13-yard line. They spike the ball, but then on 2nd down, a penalty for delay of game pushes it back to the 18, and then another penalty was declined because it was an incomplete pass, but it was an illegal formation because Marshawn Lynch was not lined up on the line of scrimmage as he was lined up as a receiver. So he was off the line down low, not as he had to be underneath the left tackle, but now it was 3rd and 15 at the 18, an incomplete pass, and now they brought out the kicking unit as they were down by 10. They needed 2 scores. There was about a minute and a half left to play, less than a minute and a half, and Hauschka would come out to attempt a 36-yard field goal. It was up, it was good, and it was now 31-24, as after the Panthers had scored 31 straight points in the first half, Seattle scores 24 unanswered points in the second half, and now with just over a minute left to play, the Seahawks would go for an onside kick. It was their last chance at a comeback, and on the onside kick, who else but Thomas Davis? He recovers the onside kick for the Panthers. He's come up big all season on defense, and here he makes a huge special teams play to recover the onside kick, and all that was left to do was for Cam Newton to take 3 knees. The Seahawks burned their final timeout after the first knee, then 2 more knees, and now the Panthers are headed to their 4th NFC Championship game in their franchise history. They hold on to win this one 31-24, and it was a tale of 2 halves as they dominated the first half, shut out the Seahawks 31-0. Then in the second half, the Seahawks, the defending NFC champions that have now been knocked out of the playoffs by the Panthers, and they avenged their loss to Seattle last year in the divisional round of the NFC playoffs. And they actually, the Seahawks stepped up in the second half. Most teams would lay down, but they actually shut out the Panthers and scored 24 points, but it wouldn't be enough to overcome what the Panthers had put up in that first half. Is the Panthers at that point at halftime, they were already on their way to the next round, and they still had a half of football to play, and Seattle almost pulls it off, but the Panthers come up with some big plays down the stretch, especially Josh Norman coming up with that big sack. Also, Luke Kuechly broke up a pass on that final drive that led to the field goal. As Baldwin, if he had caught that one, I mean, it would have saved some time for Seattle on the clock, and maybe they end up getting into the end zone also. But the defense ends up holding them to just a field goal on that last drive, and then Thomas Davis with that recovery on the onside kick. Of course, in the first half, it was just all Carolina. It actually seemed like this game was over after the first 3.5 minutes of the game, when the offense and the defense had already scored. But to Seattle's credit, they didn't just lay down. They didn't give up. They fought the whole game all the way to the end. They made an interesting game to where it did come down to an onside kick in the final minute of the game. But the Panthers, they really dominated this game, and they never trailed at any point in the game. Seattle's not able to overcome that huge deficit. They never led at any point in the game, as it really was all Carolina. And of course, in the second half, they let up some. They're obviously still out there. They're not trying to just let the Seahawks score. But, with a little bit lax defense, you got to think mentally they've already won the game, but they still had to play another half of football. And that somewhat led to Seattle being so motivated on the other side to be able to take advantage of the situation to put some points on the board and actually make it a game. But then when it came down to it, in the end, the Carolina Panthers come up with the plays that they needed to on defense after letting the Seahawks put those points on the board. And they did have some stops there in the second half. After the second touchdown, the next time the Seahawks got the ball, they forced them to punt. Of course, they ended up scoring again in the fourth quarter with that touchdown and then that field goal. But, you had the missed field goal also at the end of the first half. It's kind of interesting what would have happened if maybe they had that 3 points on the board. Would have made it a little bit closer, but even still, that 31 points was too much to overcome, as the Panthers really came out strong in the first half. A very dominant performance. But like I said, to Seattle's credit, they were the defending NFC champions, and they didn't just lay down. They fought all the way to the end. But the Panthers have now knocked them off, and one way or another, we're going to have a new NFC champion this year. As the Seahawks had been the NFC champions the last 2 years, but now it's going to be Carolina versus Arizona in the championship game, and that will be played in Carolina. And of course, last time the Arizona and Carolina faced off was in the wild card round last year. So the Panthers beat the Cardinals last year in the wild card round before being exited by the Seahawks, and now they've taken care of Seattle, knocked them out of the playoffs, and now they have to do what they did last year and repeat that by beating Arizona, but this time it will be for a trip to the Super Bowl. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in that game. But as for this game, let's look at the numbers. Cam Newton, 16 of 22, 161 passing yards and a touchdown. He also had 3 yards on the ground off of 11 carries. But John Stewart, the Green Lantern, 19 carries for 106 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also had 5 yards off a catch, which gave him a 111-yard total in this game. But John Stewart returns to the lineup and comes up big. They were missing John Stewart for sure, and they really used his performance to bolster them in that first half, as he was a big part of the offense and them building that 31-point lead. Also, Greg Olsen had a good game, 6 catches for 77 yards and a touchdown. Philly Brown, 2 catches for 22 yards. Jericho Cotchery, 3 catches for 22 yards. Dixon, 2 catches for 22 yards. Somewhat of a theme there. But then we look at the Seahawks. Russell Wilson, 31 for 48, 366 passing yards. 3 touchdowns, all of which came in the second half. and 2 interceptions. He was actually the leading rusher for the Seahawks with 32 yards off 3 carries. Beast mode Marshawn Lynch just 6 carries for 20 yards in this game, as he did not have the return that the Green Lantern did over on the other side, as John Stewart rushed for over a century mark. Anyway, he reached the century mark. But we look at Jermaine Kearse. He had a big game, 11 catches, 110 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Doug Baldwin, 8 catches for 82 yards. Tyler Lockett, 3 catches for 75 yards and a touchdown. And Luke Wilson, 4 catches for 54 yards. And Marshawn Lynch also had 2 catches for 15 yards, which gave him a total of 35 yards in the game. We look at the kickers in this game. Graham Gano was perfect, 1 for 1 on the field goals, 4 for 4 on the extra points. Steven Hauschka, 1 for 2 on the field goals, 3 for 3 on the extra points. And then we look at the defense. Josh Norman with a sack, and that came at a crucial moment in this game. That led to the only punt by the Seahawks in the second half. Luke Kuechly had an interception. They returned for a touchdown. That one made it 14-0, that pick 6. Finnegan had an interception as well. Johnson and Boston each had sacks. Edwards had a sack as well, and Short did too. And then we look at the defense for the Seahawks. Michael Bennett had a forced fumble. Frank Clark had a sack. And then we look at the team stats. 23 first downs for Seattle, 18 of which came through the air. 19 first downs for Carolina. And on third down, the Panthers 8 of 15, 53% conversion rate on third down for Carolina. And for Seattle, 5 for 11, 45% conversion rate. They went for it twice on fourth down, converting once and turning the ball over on downs once for 50% on fourth down. Total net yards in this game, Seattle 403, Carolina 295. On the ground, the Panthers netted 144, and the Seahawks netted 78 yards, although Seattle actually averaged 6.5 yards per rushing play to just 3.5 yards per rushing play for Carolina. So the Seahawks actually averaged 3 more yards per rushing play, but the Panthers ran the ball 41 times. The Seahawks only had 12 rushing plays in this game. So they weren't really committed. Of course, that in large part was due to the fact that they fell in the hole deep early, and they were forced into a situation where they couldn't run the ball. They had to just pass. Maybe if they hadn't fell in the hole so deep right away, or if they had tried to mix in the run more, maybe they would have had more success. Of course, also with the big lead, the Panthers then aren't going to load up the box, and when they did, they know they're going to pass, so when they do have that occasional run, that's why they kind of had, the success in terms of average yards per rushing play, whereas in reality, it was more just a matter of the big lead and them playing the pass, because at that point, all they had to really do was just make sure to keep the receivers in front of them and not let them go for big plays and quick scores. But we look at the total net passing yards in this game, 325 for Seattle. Russell Wilson was sacked 5 times, losing a total of 41 yards. And through the air for Carolina, they netted 151. Cam Newton was sacked once for a loss of 10 yards. And the penalties in this game, very few and far between. Only 6 total penalties between these two teams. 3 each. So 3 penalties for Seattle for 20 yards and 3 penalties against Carolina for 25 yards. The Panthers actually had 2 fumbles in this game, but they recovered both of their fumbles. And then we look at the red zone. The Panthers were perfect, 3 for 3, 100% in the red zone for Carolina. And the Seahawks 2 for 4, 50% in the red zone. In the time of possession, 35 minutes and 38 seconds for the Panthers, 24 minutes, 22 seconds for the Seahawks. And a lot of that had to do with the commitment to the run by Carolina. Even though they weren't getting a lot of yards per rush, they still ended up with a big output on the ground as they stayed committed to that ground game. And John Stewart over 100 yards rushing off of just 16 carries. And they ended up netting 144, as I said just a moment ago. So the Panthers, they play at the level that you expect them to, the way they had played all season, 15-1 during the regular season. And this is how they play: a strong running game, smash mouth football, a strong defense. Early on, you saw that they were just dominating up front in the trenches on both sides. That offensive line was doing an amazing job opening up holes and protecting Cam Newton, especially against a really tough Seattle defense. Can't give that offensive line enough credit. And then on the defensive end, they were bringing the pressure. They were making Russell Wilson run around all day long. They sacked him 5 times. They end up forcing, the couple of turnovers there. They get the couple of picks. Of course, that pick 6 really, in the opening minutes of the game, kind of really set the tone. And, the game was kind of over at that point when Kuechly ran that one back. It was just kind of a matter of time there on out. And they just kept on rolling. And they just kept on coming, and they had such a huge first half. But you never know. That's the thing is, you've seen before in the playoffs, there's been teams where at halftime it looked like they were on their way to the championship game, and then they kind of fell asleep at the wheel. And the Panthers did kind of play a little bit lax in the second half somewhat, but they clamped down and they made the big plays in the fourth quarter when they needed to fend off that comeback attempt by Seattle, who tried to make some history. They almost did. They came just shy of it. But Carolina, a huge win for them. A very dominant performance in that first half, showing the type of team that they are. And the Seahawks in that second half, they showed the type of team that they are. So it was a really good game in what at first looked like just a total blowout. But it was interesting to watch throughout the whole game all the way to the end. It actually had excitement, which is pretty rare in a game that starts off 31-0. But let me know what you think in the comments section below. Definitely interested to read your thoughts and opinions. Thank you very much for listening. It is greatly appreciated. I hope you're having a good day and having a great weekend and enjoying all the sports.